The night my husband called me his secret weapon. I thought it was a compliment. He said it while adjusting his cufflinks in the mirror, staring at his own reflection like a man already celebrating a victory. "You're my secret weapon tonight," he said casually. And I remember smiling, because back then, it felt good to be essential to someone. I helped straighten the collar of his shirt and told him everything would go perfectly. The strange thing is, I believed it. That was the last night I believed most of the things I told myself about our marriage. The dinner was at Meridian, one of those restaurants in the financial district where reservations take 3 months and the plates look more like sculptures than food. My husband chose it carefully. He understood something many people don't. The language of rooms. The kind of restaurant that silently says, "We've arrived." On the drive there, he even reminded me which fork belonged to which course. As if I hadn't spent my childhood watching my grandmother host elegant Sunday dinners for 8 people without a single note card. I wore a deep green dress that night. He had suggested something more subtle, something that wouldn't pull attention. For a moment, I almost listened, but something inside me said no. So I wore the green dress anyway. A tiny act of self-preservation I didn't fully understand yet. There were 6 of us at the table that night. 2 investors. My husband, his co-founder, his co-founder's girlfriend, and me. And somewhere between the first course and the main dish, something happened that quietly changed the entire direction of my life. Because that night, I realized I wasn't his secret weapon. I was something much worse. And once I understood that, everything else started to change. He was good at performing confidence. That's something I understood about my husband long before anyone else did. In a room full of investors, he could make it sound like success had already happened and everyone else was simply catching up to it. At first, the dinner moved the way these dinners always do. Slow, careful, everyone testing the temperature of the room before committing to real questions. Then one of the investors, a woman with the calm, sharp focus of someone who had built companies before funding them, leaned forward slightly. She started asking about the product roadmap, about scaling, about the market competition. My husband answered smoothly, confidently, like he always did. Then she asked one question that changed everything. She asked about the original market research, the insight that shaped the entire architecture of the product. And my husband smiled and said something simple. We brought in a consultant early on who helped us think through the framework. I slowly set my fork down. Because I knew that research. I knew the framework. I knew every page of the methodology he was describing. Because I had built it. 18 months earlier, I had left my job at an architecture firm, a career I had spent 9 years building because he asked me to help him build something from nothing. I conducted the research, mapped the user flows, built the first pitch deck from a blank screen while he traveled to meetings. I was the strategist, the researcher, the architect behind the idea. Everything, except the name on the legal documents. And sitting there in my green dress, listening to him call me a consultant, I finally understood something my mother used to say. The problem with invisible work is that eventually it makes you invisible too. But here's the part that surprised me most. I didn't cry. I didn't confront him. I finished dinner. Because in that moment, a different kind of plan had already started forming. And the truth is, he didn't notice it happening. Not that night. Not on the drive home. And definitely not 6 months later, when he walked into a conference room and saw me sitting at the head of the table. On the drive home that night, he was in a great mood. He said the investors seemed interested. Said the meeting had gone exactly the way he planned. His voice carried that familiar confidence. The same confidence that had convinced me to walk away from my own career 18 months earlier. I waited until we stopped at a red light. Then I asked one simple question. So, Who was the consultant? The silence that followed lasted a little too long. Finally, he said, I was simplifying for the room. He explained that investors didn't need every detail, that the narrative had to stay clean, that it wasn't personal. And then he squeezed my hand like that explanation should have solved everything. But that night, lying awake beside him, staring at the ceiling we had looked at together for years, something shifted inside me. My mother used to say something when I was younger. She said, the problem with invisible work is that eventually it makes you invisible too. And suddenly I realized something uncomfortable. For 2.5 years, I hadn't just been helping build his company. I had been disappearing inside it. So the next morning I did something very quiet. I packed only the things that had always been mine. My laptop, my research files, my portfolio from the architecture firm, and the small framed photo of my grandmother that sat on my side of the dresser. Then I drove across the city to my friend's apartment at 7 a.m. When she opened the door and saw my face, she didn't ask questions. She simply stepped aside and said, come in. 2 days later, she asked me something nobody had asked in a long time. What do you want to build? And that question changed everything. Because once I started answering it, I realized I had already built something once before. I had just built it for the wrong person. What I didn't know yet was that 6 months later, the same company he took credit for would walk into a meeting asking me for help. 6 months later, my life looked completely different. The idea my friend pushed me to write down had turned into something real. A platform built for independent design firms, helping them manage investors, financing, and projects without losing control of their own work. It combined everything I understood: architecture, research, and the messy world of startup funding. Those months weren't glamorous. There were weeks I barely slept. Meetings that went nowhere. Moments driving home late at night wondering if I had made the biggest mistake of my life. But there was one difference this time. Every long night, every hard decision, every small win, it was mine. Then one afternoon, my mentor forwarded me a pitch deck with a short message. Thought you should see this. I opened the file, and within 30 seconds, I recognized it. The company, the framework, even the market strategy that had started as sketches on a whiteboard in our second bedroom. My husband's company was looking for funding again. And this time, my firm was one of the investors reviewing the deal. A week later, we scheduled the meeting. Thursday, 2 o'clock. I was already seated at the head of the table when the door opened. He walked in, laughing with his co-founder. Then he saw me. The expression on his face changed slowly. First confusion, then recognition, then something else. I didn't smile. I simply introduced myself the way I would in any professional meeting. Welcome. Let's begin. And in that moment, I understood something my grandmother once told me. A woman's real power isn't what she says. It's what she quietly builds, while everyone else assumes she isn't building anything at all.